"Father, we need to run," said the millionaire's son, pointing to his mother's closet with eyes full of fear. The man followed the boy's gaze, and when he saw something move inside the cupboard, his heart stopped for a moment. When the security cameras reveal the secret, the man is completely shocked. Watch until the end to see what happens. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The grandfather clock's steady ticking echoed through the vast marble halls of the Richardson estate, each sound reverberating like thunder in Alexander Richardson's mind. The successful business mogul stood in his study, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the meticulously maintained gardens below. His empire, built over 2 decades of relentless work and sacrifice, sprawled before him in the form of this magnificent mansion, yet something felt terribly wrong. His 8-year-old son, Timothy, had been acting strange lately. The usually cheerful boy had grown quiet, his bright blue eyes clouded with an inexplicable worry that no child his age should carry. Alexander had noticed the change about 3 weeks ago, right after his wife Victoria had hired a new personal assistant, James Crawford. The sound of rapid footsteps pulled Alexander from his thoughts. Timothy burst into the study, his small face pale with fear. "Dad, there's something in Mum's closet," he whispered urgently, tugging at his father's sleeve. "I saw shadows moving." Alexander's protective instincts immediately kicked in. He knew the mansion's security system was state-of-the-art. Motion sensors, cameras, and a team of guards patrolling the perimeter. How could anyone have gotten in? Still, the terror in his son's eyes was real. "Show me," he said firmly, taking Timothy's hand. They walked through the mansion's opulent corridors, their footsteps muffled by thick Persian carpets. The master bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and Alexander's heart rate quickened as they approached. The walk-in closet was Victoria's pride and joy, a room larger than most people's living rooms, filled with designer clothes and accessories, worth a small fortune. As they neared the partially open closet door, Alexander saw what had frightened his son. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass panels that separated the closet sections. "Stay here," Alexander whispered to Timothy, positioning himself between his son and the potential threat. He reached for the door handle, his mind racing through possibilities. The security monitors in his office would show if anyone had breached the perimeter, but right now his priority was protecting his son. As he pushed the door open, the sight before him made his blood run cold. The shadow belonged to James Crawford, Victoria's personal assistant, hurriedly stuffing papers into a briefcase. The man froze when he saw Alexander, his usually composed face twisting into an expression of surprise and something else. Guilt? "Mr. Richardson," Crawford straightened up, attempting to regain his professional demeanor. "I was just helping Mrs. Richardson organize some documents." But Alexander's sharp business instincts, honed by years of detecting lies and deception in corporate boardrooms, told him something was terribly wrong. His wife was supposed to be at a charity luncheon, and Crawford should have been with her. Instead, here he was, secretly going through their private belongings. "In our bedroom closet." Alexander's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Where is my wife, Crawford?" The assistant's eyes darted to the door, then back to Alexander. "Mrs. Richardson asked me to retrieve some important papers. She's waiting for them at the country club." Timothy, who had crept closer despite his father's instructions, suddenly spoke up. "That's not true. I saw him here yesterday too, when Mom said she was at yoga." Alexander felt his world tilt slightly on its axis. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Victoria's late nights, her sudden interest in charity events and yoga classes, the mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. His mind raced back to the security cameras in his office. He needed to check the footage to see what else Crawford had been doing in their home. "Leave the briefcase," Alexander commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And get out of my house now." Crawford's professional mask slipped further, revealing a flash of defiance. "Mrs. Richardson won't be pleased about this," he said, his tone carrying a subtle threat that made Alexander's fists clench. "I'll deal." "With my wife," Alexander replied coldly. "You have 30 seconds to leave before I call security." As Crawford hurried past them, Alexander noticed something fall from the briefcase, a small flash drive that skittered across the polished floor and under a dresser. He waited until the assistant's footsteps faded before retrieving it, his heart pounding with the certainty that whatever was on this drive would change his life forever. "Come on, Tim," he said, taking his son's hand again. "We need to check something in my office." As they walked to the security room, Alexander's mind was already formulating plans. Whatever he was about to discover, his priority was protecting Timothy. The boy squeezed his hand tightly, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The security room hummed with the quiet efficiency of dozens of monitors showing every angle of the estate. Alexander inserted the flash drive into his computer, dreading what he might find. As files began populating the screen, he realized this was just the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The contents of the flash drive left Alexander struggling to breathe. Financial records, private investigators' reports, and most devastatingly intimate photographs of Victoria and James Crawford together at various locations. But what truly made his hands shake were the detailed dossiers about his business dealings, including confidential information that only someone with intimate access to his life could have known. Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the security room, his young face a mask of confusion and concern. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Alexander forced himself to smile, though his world was crumbling around him. "Everything's going to be fine, buddy," he assured his son, while his mind raced through the implications of what he'd discovered. Victoria hadn't just been having an affair. She and Crawford had been systematically gathering information about his business empire, his assets, his vulnerabilities. This was a calculated betrayal that went far beyond matters of the heart. The security footage revealed more than he could have imagined. Over the past months, Crawford had been accessing different areas of the mansion when everyone was supposed to be away, photographing documents, copying files. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with devastating clarity. A notification popped up on his phone. Victoria was at the front gate, returning early from her supposed charity luncheon. Alexander quickly copied the flash drives, contents to his secure server, and pocketed the drive. He needed to confront her, but first he had to ensure Timothy was safe. "Tim, remember how much fun you had in the game room last week?" Alexander asked, keeping his voice light. "Why don't you go play there for a while? I need to talk to Mum about some grown-up stuff." Timothy's eyes showed understanding beyond his years. "Is it about Mr. Crawford being in Mom's closet?" he asked. Softly, Alexander knelt before his son, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Yes, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of everything. I promise." He watched as Timothy walked to the game room, his small shoulders squared with a determination that made Alexander's heart ache. The sound of Victoria's heels clicking on marble echoed through the foyer. Alexander stood in the security room, watching her entrance on the monitors. She looked flawless as always, her designer outfit perfectly coordinated, her blonde hair immaculate. How many times had he admired that perfect facade, never seeing the deception beneath? He made his way to the main hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. Victoria's smile faltered when she saw his expression. "Alexander, I thought you'd be at the office today." "Like you were at your charity luncheon?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Or was it yoga? I'm having trouble keeping track of your lies, Victoria." The color drained from her face, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about? I've been at the Children's Hospital Foundation event all afternoon." Alexander held up the flash drive. "Interesting choice of location to store your private investigation reports. Our bedroom closet. Really?" Victoria's composure cracked, her perfectly manicured hands clenching her designer purse. "You went through my private things?" she demanded, attempting to turn the tables. "No, our son saw your lover going through our private things," Alexander corrected her, watching as shock registered on her face. "Timothy saw Crawford in your closet. He came to me, terrified that someone had broken in. Imagine his confusion when he recognized your personal assistant. Victoria's eyes darted around the foyer, calculating her next move. "It's not what you think," she began, but Alexander cut her off. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "I've seen everything. The surveillance photos, the financial reports, the dossiers on my business partners. Were you planning to take everything, Victoria, my company, my assets, my son?" She lifted her chin defiantly. "You never appreciated what you had, Alexander. Always working, building your precious empire. Did you ever stop to think about what I wanted?" "And what was that?" "To destroy everything I've built?" He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Did you ever think about what this would do to Timothy?" The mention of their son seemed to strike a nerve. Victoria's perfect mask slipped further, revealing a glimpse of the ruthless calculator beneath. "Timothy would have been fine. Children are resilient. And with the settlement I had planned, he would have wanted for nothing." Alexander felt a cold fury settle in his chest. This woman, whom he had loved and trusted for 10 years, had been plotting his downfall while sharing his bed. "Get out," he said quietly. "Pack a bag and leave. My lawyers will contact yours in the morning." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "You think it's that simple? You have no idea what's coming, Alexander. I've spent years preparing for this. You think you can just throw me out?" "You have 1 hour," he replied, his voice steady despite the rage and pain coursing through him. "After that, I'm calling the police and showing them evidence of corporate espionage. Your choice." He turned away from her, heading toward the game room where Timothy waited. Behind him, Victoria's voice rang out, filled with venom. "This isn't over, Alexander. You have no idea what I'm capable of." He paused without turning around. "No, Victoria. Until today, I really didn't. But now I do, and I'm ready for whatever you throw at me. You won't hurt our son with your games." As he walked away, Alexander could hear her furious movements, the sharp clicks of her heels on marble as she stormed upstairs. He knew this was just the beginning of a war that would test every fiber of his being. But as he approached the game room, hearing Timothy's quiet humming from within, he knew with absolute certainty that he would fight with everything he had to protect his son from the storm that was coming. The next morning dawned with an eerie silence in the Richardson mansion. Alexander had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing security footage and documents from the flash drive. The more he discovered, the more his stomach churned with the realization of how methodically Victoria had planned everything. Timothy sat across from him at the breakfast table, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate. The boy hadn't asked where his mother was, but his eyes kept drifting to her empty chair. Alexander cleared his throat, searching for the right words to explain the situation to an 8-year-old. "Tim," he began gently, "Mum is going to be staying somewhere else for a while. Things between grown-ups can get complicated sometimes, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault." Timothy looked up, his blue eyes serious. "Is it because of Mr. Crawford?" he asked directly, showing that perceptive nature that sometimes startled Alexander. "I heard them talking sometimes when they thought I was playing video games. They didn't sound nice." Alexander reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "You're very observant, buddy. Yes, Mr. Crawford is part of the reason, but the important thing is that you and I are going to stick together, okay?" Before Timothy could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his corporate office. His blood ran cold as he read the text from his CFO. Emergency board meeting called. Victoria's lawyers claiming fraudulent business practices. "Need you here ASAP." Alexander took a deep breath, his mind racing. Of course, Victoria would strike at his company first. She knew it was his life's work. He looked at Timothy, who was watching him with concern. "How about spending the day with Mrs. Peterson?" he suggested, referring to their longtime housekeeper, who had helped raise Timothy since infancy. "Is something wrong, Dad?" Timothy asked, his voice small but steady. "Just some business stuff I need to take care of," Alexander assured him, trying to keep his voice light. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned making her famous chocolate chip cookies today. Maybe you could help her." After ensuring Timothy was settled with Mrs. Peterson, Alexander rushed to his corporate headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The atmosphere in E The boardroom was tense when he arrived, with board members huddled in small groups speaking in hushed tones. His CFO, Michael Chen, pulled him aside before he could enter. "Alex, it's bad," he warned, his usually calm demeanor shaken. "Victoria's lawyers have submitted documents suggesting you've been manipulating company records to hide profits. They're demanding a full audit and threatening to go to the SEC." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Those documents were part of what she and Crawford stole from my office. They're internal projections, not actual records." "The board doesn't know that," Michael replied, "and some of them are scared. Johnson and Peters are already talking about a temporary step down while this is investigated." Alexander straightened his tie and squared his shoulders. He had built this company from nothing, turning a small investment firm into a billion-dollar empire. He wouldn't let Victoria destroy it with lies and stolen documents. The board meeting was exactly as brutal as he expected. Victoria's lawyers had done their homework, presenting a compelling case of alleged financial misconduct. Alexander watched as faces he'd known for years regarded him with suspicion and doubt. "These allegations are not only false, they're malicious," Alexander stated firmly, standing at the head of the boardroom table. "My wife and her lover orchestrated this attack by stealing confidential documents and presenting them out of context. I have security footage proving their corporate espionage. Your domestic issues are not our concern, Alexander," Richard Johnson, one of the senior board members, interrupted. "These allegations, regardless of how they came to light, require investigation. The company's reputation is at stake." Alexander looked around the room, noting who avoided his gaze and who met it directly. He'd faced corporate takeover attempts before, but this was different. This was personal, designed to hurt him where it would hurt most, his legacy. "Welcome any investigation," he declared, his voice steady. "But I will not step down. This company has been built on integrity and innovation. I won't let false allegations tarnish that." The meeting continued for hours, with lawyers presenting arguments and counter-arguments. By the end, Alexander had managed to maintain his position, but only barely. The board agreed to an independent audit rather than an immediate leadership change, but he could feel the confidence in his leadership wavering. As he left the office, that evening his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "This is just the beginning, ready to negotiate yet?" Alexander deleted the message without responding. He knew Victoria was counting on him being emotionally rattled, making mistakes, out of anger or fear. But as he drove home to Timothy, his resolve strengthened. She might have planned this attack for years, but she had underestimated one crucial factor: his determination to protect what really mattered. When he arrived home, he found Timothy and Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen, the air sweet with the smell of fresh cookies. His son's face lit up when he walked in, chocolate smeared adorably on one cheek. "Dad, we made 3 batches," Timothy announced proudly, "and Mrs. Peterson taught me how to measure ingredients properly." Looking at his son's innocent enthusiasm, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria could attack his company, threaten his reputation, try to destroy everything he'd built, but she couldn't take away what mattered most: his relationship with Timothy. He would fight back, not with the anger and bitterness she expected, but with the calculated precision that had made him successful in the first place. "That's fantastic, buddy," he said, pulling Timothy into a hug. "How about we try some of those cookies and you tell me all about your day?" As they sat together at the kitchen counter, Alexander's mind was already forming a plan. Victoria might have struck the first blow, but he would make sure it was her last. The following days brought a flurry of legal activity as Victoria's attorneys filed motion after motion, each designed to destabilize Alexander's control of his company. But amid the chaos, help arrived from an unexpected source. Sarah Crawford, James's ex-wife, reached out through Alexander's legal team with information that could change everything. They met in a quiet cafe several blocks from his office, away from the press that had begun camping outside the Richardson building. Sarah was elegant but understated, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup as she spoke. "I recognized the pattern as soon as I saw the news," she explained, her voice steady despite the obvious pain in her eyes. "James did the same thing to me 3 years ago. He infiltrated my family's business, gained our trust and then tried to destroy everything from the inside. Alexander leaned forward, his interest piqued. What happened? He underestimated me, Sarah replied with a slight smile. I had kept records of everything, his late-night phone calls, suspicious meetings, unexplained expenses. When he tried to take control of my family's company, I was ready. She pulled out a USB drive from her purse, and I've kept tracking him since then. Old habits die hard, I suppose. The information Sarah provided was invaluable. James Crawford had a history of corporate manipulation, working with wealthy spouses to orchestrate takeovers and massive settlements. Victoria wasn't his first partner in these schemes. She was just the latest in a long line of conspirators. Why are you helping me? Alexander asked, studying Sarah carefully. You don't know me. Because I have a daughter, she replied simply, and I saw how these schemes affect children. They become pawns in a game they never asked to play. When I read that you had an 8-year-old son, she paused, composing herself. No child should have to go through that. Back at the mansion, Alexander found Timothy in the library, working on his homework with Mrs. Peterson. The sight of his son so focused, his tongue slightly sticking out as he concentrated on his math problems, made his heart swell with love and determination. How's it going, champ? He asked, sitting down beside Timothy. Mrs. Peterson. Just helping me with fractions, Timothy replied, looking up with a smile. She says they're like pieces of a puzzle, and I just need to find the right pieces that fit together. The analogy struck Alexander as particularly apt for their current situation. He was finally getting all the pieces he needed to solve his own puzzle, thanks to Sarah Crawford's revelation. Later that evening, after Timothy had gone to bed, Alexander sat in his study reviewing the information Sarah had provided. Crawford's pattern was clear. He specialized in corporate infiltration through personal relationships, always targeting wealthy business owners through their spouses or close family members. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. The board seems very interested in those offshore accounts you've been hiding. Should we discuss terms now? Alexander smiled grimly. Victoria didn't know that Sarah had provided documentation of similar threats in Crawford's previous schemes. She also didn't know that Alexander had already spoken with federal investigators about the pattern of corporate espionage they had uncovered. He was about to put his phone away when another message came through, this time from an unknown number. Watch your back, Richardson. Some games are played for keeps. The threat was clear, but Alexander remained calm. He had anticipated escalation, and his security team had already implemented enhanced protection protocols for both him and Timothy. A soft knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Peterson, her kind face concerned. Mr. Richardson, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I think you should know. Timothy had a nightmare about his mother. He's asking for you. Alexander found his son sitting up in bed, small hands clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Dad, Timothy whispered as Alexander sat on the edge of his bed. I saw Mom in my dream. She was trying to take me away from you. That's not going to happen, buddy, Alexander assured him, pulling his son close. I promise you, we're going to stay together. But Mom said. Timothy hesitated, then continued in a rush. She called today when I was with Mrs. Peterson. She said everything was your fault and that she would make sure I knew the truth about you. Alexander felt a surge of anger at Victoria's manipulation, but kept his voice gentle. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're angry or hurt. But you know me, Tim. You know who I am. Trust what you see and what you know in your heart, okay? As he held his son until he fell back asleep, Alexander's resolve hardened. Victoria and Crawford had underestimated him, thinking his love for his family was a weakness they could exploit. But they were about to learn that love could be the strongest motivation of all, not for revenge, but for justice. The morning. Sun cast long shadows through the windows of Alexander's home office as he pored over the documents Sarah Crawford had provided. Each page revealed another layer of James Crawford's elaborate schemes, showing a pattern that stretched back nearly a decade. But what caught his attention was a recurring name in the paperwork: Global Tech Ventures. Michael, Alexander spoke, Into his phone. "I need you to pull everything we have on Global Tech Ventures. Every transaction, every meeting, every email." His CFO's response was immediate. "That's Victoria's pet project, isn't it? The tech investment firm she started consulting for last year." "Exactly," Alexander replied, his mind racing. "And I'm beginning to think it's much more than just a consulting gig." As he waited for Michael to compile the information, Alexander's attention was drawn to the sound of laughter from the garden. Timothy was outside with his tutor, having his lessons in the morning sunshine. The boy's resilience in the face of everything happening around him was remarkable, but Alexander could still see moments of sadness cross his son's face when he thought no one was watching. A knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Peterson entered, carrying a stack of mail. "These just arrived, Mr. Richardson," she said, placing them on his desk. "And there's something else you should see." She pulled out an envelope from her pocket, already opened. "This came for Timothy yesterday. I hope you don't mind, but given everything that's happening, I thought I should check it first." Inside was a birthday party invitation from one of Timothy's classmates. But what caught Alexander's eye was the handwritten note at the bottom. "Victoria will be helping with the party planning. Won't it be wonderful to spend time with your mum?" Alexander's jaw clenched. Victoria was now trying to manipulate their son's social circle, using his friends' parents to gain access to him. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. You did the right thing." His phone buzzed with an email from Michael. The Global Tech Ventures documentation was extensive, but what immediately stood out were the transfer dates. Large sums of money moving through the company's accounts that coincided perfectly with Crawford's previous schemes. Alexander's hands moved swiftly over his keyboard as he dug deeper into the financial records. Global Tech Ventures wasn't just a consulting client for Victoria, it was a front company designed to hide the money trail from Crawford's various operations. And Victoria had been involved long before she hired him as her personal assistant. "Sir," his security chief's voice came through the intercom, "we have a situation at the front gate. Mrs. Richardson is here with her lawyers. They're demanding entry, citing a court order for property inspection." Alexander stood, straightening his tie. "Let them in, but have the security team record everything, and make sure Timothy stays in the garden with his tutor." Victoria swept into the foyer like she still owned the place, flanked by 2 attorneys and, unsurprisingly, James Crawford. She wore an expensive suit and a confident smile that faltered slightly when she saw Alexander waiting calmly at the bottom of the grand staircase. "Still playing Lord of the Manor, Alexander?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "We'll see how long that lasts." "Victoria," he acknowledged coolly, then turned to her lawyers. "I assume you have the court order." As one of the attorneys stepped forward with the paperwork, Alexander caught Crawford studying the security cameras in the corners of the foyer. The man's expression was calculating, professional, but there was something else there too, a hint of worry that hadn't been present before. "You'll find everything in order," Victoria's lead attorney stated. "We have the right to inspect and document all joint property for the divorce proceedings." Alexander nodded. "Of course, my security team will accompany you, but Mr. Crawford stays here in the foyer. He has no legal standing to participate in this inspection." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "James is my personal assistant. I need him to help catalog my belongings." "Your personal assistant who was caught stealing private documents from my home," Alexander replied evenly. "I don't think so. He can wait here or he can leave. Your choice." Before Victoria could argue, a child's laugh echoed from the garden, causing her to turn toward the sound. Alexander saw something flicker across her face. Regret? Longing? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual mask of cold determination. "Fine," she snapped. "James, wait here. This won't take long." As Victoria and her lawyers began their inspection, Alexander maintained his position at the bottom of the stairs, watching Crawford from the corner of his eye. The man was trying to appear relaxed, but his fingers kept twitching toward his pocket, where the outline of a phone was visible. "Expecting an important call, Crawford?" Alexander asked casually. Crawford's smile was thin. Just checking the time. Some of us have actual work to do. Yes, I imagine running global tech ventures keeps you quite busy, Alexander replied, satisfaction coursing through him as he watched Crawford's composed facade crack slightly. Fascinating company. Very. Creative accounting practices. Crawford's hand stilled over his pocket. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Alexander stepped closer, lowering his voice. Sarah sends her regards, by the way. She's been quite helpful in understanding your particular business model. The color drained from Crawford's face. For the first time since this ordeal began, Alexander saw real fear in the man's eyes. But before either of them could speak again, Victoria's voice rang out from upstairs. Everything's changed, she said, descending the stairs with her attorneys. You've moved my things, Alexander. Trying to hide assets already? Your things are exactly where you left them, Victoria, though you seem to have forgotten what belonged to you and what belonged to us when you took those confidential documents. Victoria's laugh was sharp. Still hung up on that? The board seems more interested in what those documents revealed than how they were obtained. Yes, Alexander replied calmly, but I wonder if the SEC will feel the same way about global tech ventures. The subtle widening of Victoria's eyes told him everything he needed to know. She hadn't expected him to make that connection, hadn't thought he would dig deep enough to uncover the true extent of her involvement with Crawford's schemes. Timothy's tutor had just finished their morning lesson when the raised voices drifted out to the garden. The boy's shoulders tensed, recognizing his mother's sharp tone. His tutor, Miss Amanda, quickly suggested they move to the library for their reading session, but Timothy's eyes remained fixed on the French doors leading into the house. Inside, the confrontation was escalating. Victoria had recovered quickly from Alexander's revelation about global tech ventures, her shock transforming into calculated aggression. You think you've figured it all out, don't you? She sneered, moving closer to Alexander. The brilliant businessman, always in control. But you've missed something crucial, dear husband. Something that will change everything. Alexander maintained his composed stance, though his mind raced through possibilities. What card could she still have left to play? The global tech connection should have been her ace in the hole. Crawford stepped forward, his earlier unease replaced by a smirk. Should we tell him, Victoria, about the offshore accounts? What offshore accounts? Alexander's voice was steady, but he felt a flicker of concern. He had never established any offshore banking presence. It had been one of his firm principles in building his business empire. Victoria pulled a folder from her designer bag, handling it with theatrical care. It's amazing what a skilled forensic accountant can find when they know where to look, especially when they have internal documents pointing them in the right direction. Alexander's mind suddenly clicked into place. The false trail, the manufactured evidence. They hadn't just been gathering real documents, they had been creating fake ones, building a fictional paper trail that would take investigators months to disprove. "You've forged evidence," he stated, not as a question but as a revelation. That's why Crawford was in such a hurry to hide that flash drive. You were planting false documentation. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. Alexander pressed his advantage. How long did it take you to create those fake transactions? To backdate the accounts? It must have been months of careful planning. Prove it, Crawford challenged, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Oh, I will, Alexander assured them. Every digital document leaves traces. Every backdated entry creates inconsistencies, and your previous victims' cases show an interesting pattern of similar evidence appearing just at the right moment. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway made them all turn. Timothy stood in the doorway, his favorite book clutched to his chest, Miss Amanda hovering anxiously behind him. Mom? His voice was small but clear. Why are you trying to hurt? Dad? Victoria's face softened, her mask cracking to reveal genuine emotion for the first time. Timothy, sweetie, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important things. But I heard you, Timothy continued, taking a step forward. You and Mr. Crawford, last month in the garden, you said you were going to take everything away from Dad. You said you were going to make him sorry. Alexander watched as Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She hadn't realized that her own son had been witness to her plotting, hadn't considered that her 8-year-old might understand more than she gave him credit for. "Timothy," she started, reaching for him, but the boy stepped back, moving closer to his father. "You lied," Timothy said simply. "You and Mr. Crawford lied about Dad. Miss Amanda says lying is wrong no matter what." The presence of Timothy's tutor, an independent witness to this exchange, clearly rattled Victoria. She shot a desperate look at Crawford, who was already backing toward the door. "We should continue this discussion through our attorneys," Crawford suggested smoothly, but Alexander wasn't finished. "Before you go," he said, pressing a button on his phone, "you should know that every word of this conversation has been recorded, and Sarah Crawford has provided some very interesting context about your previous operations." Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. "You're bluffing," she hissed, but her eyes darted uncertainly between Alexander and Crawford. "Am I?" Alexander moved to stand beside Timothy, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Would you like to explain to the authorities how Global Tech Ventures connects to the Whitman case or the Peterson settlement? Sarah kept very detailed records." Crawford's face had gone completely pale. "Victoria," he said urgently, "we need to leave. Now." "But..." Victoria stood frozen, staring at Timothy, who had pressed himself against his father's side. In that moment, she seemed to realize just how much she had lost, not just her schemes and plans, but something far more precious. "I never meant..." she began, but Timothy turned away, burying his face in his father's jacket. "I think you should go," Alexander said quietly. "Your lawyers can contact mine about the next steps. But Victoria..." He waited until she met his eyes. "If you ever try to use our son as a pawn again, I'll make sure every detail of your operation with Crawford becomes public record." As Victoria and Crawford hurried from the mansion, Alexander knelt beside Timothy, whose brave facade was finally cracking. "You did good, buddy," he whispered, pulling his son into a tight hug. "Really good." Miss Amanda discreetly stepped out to give them privacy, leaving father and son to hold each other in the sudden quiet of the foyer. The worst of the storm had passed, but Alexander knew there would be more challenges ahead. For now, though, he focused on the feeling of his son's small arms around his neck, drawing strength from the pure and unconditional love that Victoria had never truly understood. The following morning, Alexander sat in his corporate office, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. Michael Chen, his CFO, was presenting their findings about Global Tech Ventures, while Sarah Crawford participated via secure video conference. The evidence they had assembled was damning, but Alexander knew Victoria wouldn't go down without a fight. "The pattern is identical to what they used in the Whitman case," Sarah explained, her image clear on the large screen. "They create legitimate-looking companies, build up a paper trail of transactions, then use those companies to hide the real money movements." Michael nodded, pulling up a series of complex financial charts. "We've identified at least 3 other shell companies connected to Global Tech. The question is, how do we proceed without spooking them into destroying evidence?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, considering their options. The previous day's confrontation had rattled Victoria and Crawford, but that made them more dangerous, not less. Cornered people often made desperate moves. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Peterson. "Timothy asked to skip his piano lesson today. He seems upset after yesterday. Should I be concerned?" Alexander felt a pang of worry. Despite Timothy's brave face during the confrontation, the emotional toll on his son was becoming increasingly evident. He quickly typed a response. "Let him skip today. I'll be home early to spend time with him." "We need to move carefully," Alexander told his team, returning to the matter at hand. "Victoria still has supporters on the board, and Crawford's connections run deep. One wrong move could give them the ammunition they need." Sarah's voice came through the speakers, tinged with urgency. "There's something else you should know, Alexander. When James did this to me, he had help from inside the banking system. Someone who could backdate transactions, create false paper trails that could withstand initial scrutiny. "Do you know who?" Alexander asked, leaning forward. "I never got a name, but I found references to someone called the Architect in James's files. Whoever they are, they're the key to making these schemes work." A knock at his office door interrupted their discussion. His assistant entered with an urgent expression. "Mr. Richardson, the SEC investigators are here. They're demanding immediate access to all company records." Alexander exchanged glances with Michael. They had expected this move, but not so soon. Victoria must have accelerated her timeline after yesterday's confrontation. "Tell them I'll be right there," Alexander replied calmly. To his team, he added, "This is it, everything we've prepared for. Michael, implement Protocol Omega. Sarah, send everything you have to our secure server. It's time to show them what a real paper trail looks like." As his team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Alexander took a moment to center himself. He pulled out his phone and looked at his favorite photo of Timothy, his son laughing on a carousel during their last vacation together before everything fell apart. This wasn't just about saving his company anymore. It was about protecting his son's future from people who would destroy anything for profit. The SEC investigators were waiting in the conference room, along with Victoria's lead attorney and, surprisingly, Victoria herself. She wore a triumphant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Richardson," the lead investigator began, "we have reason to believe that significant financial irregularities exist within your company's records. We'll need full access to all accounts, transactions, and correspondence dating back 5 years." Alexander nodded professionally. "Of course, we maintain comprehensive records of all our transactions. Michael Chen, our CFO, will provide you with everything you need." He paused, then added, "including our recent findings regarding Global Tech Ventures and its subsidiary companies." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. She hadn't expected him to mention Global Tech so openly. "Global Tech Ventures isn't relevant to this investigation," her attorney interjected quickly. "Actually," Alexander replied, "it's extremely relevant, especially given its connections to several other companies currently under federal investigation for financial fraud." The lead investigator's interest was clearly piqued. "What connections?" Alexander opened a folder and began laying out documents on the conference table. Over the past 3 years, Global Tech Ventures has been involved in a series of questionable transactions with companies that later turned out to be shells for fraudulent activities. The pattern is quite fascinating. Victoria's attorney tried to interrupt, but Alexander continued smoothly. "We've prepared a complete dossier on these connections, including evidence of backdated transactions and artificially created paper trails. We believe someone known as the Architect might be involved." The effect of that name was electric. One of the SEC investigators actually straightened in his chair, while Victoria's face went completely white. "That's enough," Victoria snapped, standing abruptly. "This is a transparent attempt to deflect from your own misconduct, Alexander." But the lead investigator was already reaching for the dossier. "Mrs. Richardson, please sit down. Mr. Richardson, tell us more about these connections." For the next hour, Alexander methodically laid out the evidence they had gathered. He watched as the investigators' initial skepticism transformed into intense interest, their questions becoming increasingly focused on Global Tech rather than his own company. Victoria sat in stony silence, her earlier confidence evaporating with each new piece of evidence. Her attorney kept trying to steer the conversation back to the original allegations, but the investigators were clearly following a new scent. As the meeting concluded, the lead investigator turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Richardson, we'll need to schedule a separate interview with you regarding your role in Global Tech Ventures, and we'll need to speak with Mr. Crawford as well." Alexander gathered his papers, maintaining his professional demeanor, despite the satisfaction he felt seeing Victoria's plans unravel. As he headed back to his office, his phone buzzed with another text from Mrs. Peterson. "Timothy is asking if you'll be home for dinner. He made you a drawing." Looking at the message, Alexander felt a wave of emotion wash over him. In all the corporate warfare and legal maneuvering, These simple moments with his son were what truly mattered. He had just struck a significant blow in the battle with Victoria, but the real victory would be in maintaining Timothy's trust and happiness. That evening, Alexander arrived home to find Timothy waiting in the foyer, a colorful piece of paper clutched in his hands. The boy's face lit up at the sight of his father, momentarily free from the worry that had become too common lately. "Dad, I drew something for you," Timothy exclaimed, proudly holding up his artwork. It was a detailed drawing of their family, just the two of them, standing in front of what appeared to be their house with a bright sun shining above. Alexander knelt down to examine the picture more closely. "This is beautiful, buddy. You've really captured the details of the house." He pointed to some intricate lines in the background. "What's this part here?" Timothy's expression grew serious. "That's the security cameras, to keep us safe." The innocent comment carried a weight that made Alexander's heart ache. His 8-year-old son shouldn't have to think about security systems and safety measures. "How about we hang this in my office?" Alexander suggested, trying to keep his tone light. "Right where I can see it while I work." As they walked to his home office together, Alexander noticed something different about Timothy's demeanor. The boy seemed to be gathering courage to say something important. "Dad?" Timothy finally spoke as Alexander was finding the perfect spot for the drawing. "Is Mom bad?" The question stopped Alexander in his tracks. He turned to face his son, choosing his words carefully. "Your mom, she's made some wrong choices, Tim, but that doesn't make her completely bad. People are complicated. Sometimes they do things that hurt, others without thinking about the consequences." Timothy nodded slowly, processing this information. "Like when Billy in my class took someone else's lunch money and tried to blame it on another kid?" "Something like that," Alexander agreed, marveling at his son's ability to find relatable parallels. But on a bigger scale, is that why Mr. Crawford was helping her? To take things that weren't theirs? Before Alexander could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a call from Miss Sarah Crawford. She says it's urgent." Alexander squeezed Timothy's shoulder reassuringly. "Why don't you show Mrs. Peterson where you think we should hang your drawing? I need to take this call." In his study, Sarah's voice was tense with excitement. "Alexander, I found something big. Remember the architect we discussed? I think I know who it is." Alexander closed the door quietly. "Who?" "Robert Whitman." The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Robert Whitman, one of Victoria's closest friends from college, who now held a senior position at one of the largest banks in the country. The same Robert Whitman who had tried to persuade Alexander to invest in several questionable ventures over the years. "He's been at the center of it all," Sarah continued. "The fake transactions, the backdated records. He had the access and expertise to make it all look legitimate. I found correspondence between him and James dating back 5 years." Alexander's mind raced through implications. That's why their schemes were so effective. They had someone on the inside manipulating the records at the source. Exactly. And there's more. Whitman's been careless lately. He left a trail when he created the false documents about your offshore accounts. I have proof they were fabricated. Just then Alexander heard a commotion from downstairs. Mrs. Peterson's voice carried up the stairs, sounding unusually agitated. "Mrs. Richardson, you can't just come in like this. Mr. Richardson is on an important call." Alexander's study door burst open before he could respond. Victoria stood there, her usual polish disrupted by obvious distress. "Call off the SEC investigation," she demanded without preamble. "You have no idea what you're getting into." "Sarah, I'll call you back," Alexander said calmly, ending the call. To Victoria, he replied, "I'm not calling off anything. The investigators will find what they find." "They'll find what Robert wants them to find," Victoria snapped, but there was fear beneath her anger. "He's not someone you want to cross, Alexander." "So Whitman is the architect," Alexander stated, watching her reaction carefully. "How long has he been helping you and Crawford with your schemes?" Victoria's face went through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like resignation. "You don't understand. Robert, He doesn't just help with the schemes, he owns them. Crawford and we're just pieces on his board. And what about our son? Alexander asked quietly. Was he just another piece in the game? Victoria flinched. Timothy was never supposed to be involved, but Robert said we needed leverage, something to ensure your cooperation when the time came. Mrs. Richardson, Mrs. Peterson's voice called. From downstairs, panic evident in her tone. Timothy's gone, he's not in the house. Alexander's blood ran cold. In the commotion of Victoria's arrival, no one had noticed where Timothy had gone. He rushed to the security room, Victoria right behind him. The monitors showed the back garden gate standing open, the same gate Timothy knew was rarely locked during the day. He must have heard us arguing, Victoria whispered, her face pale. Alexander, if he's out there alone. But Alexander was already moving, his phone in hand, calling his security team. As he rushed toward the garden, a text message appeared on his screen from an unknown number. The boy is safe. For now. Ready to cooperate? The game had just changed dramatically, and Alexander realized with growing horror that they had all underestimated just how far Robert Whitman would go to protect his operation. The next hour was a blur of activity at the Richardson mansion. Alexander's security team had mobilized immediately, coordinating with local law enforcement while keeping the situation as discreet as possible. Victoria, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine terror, paced the security room as they reviewed camera footage from every angle. This is all my fault, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I never thought Robert would go this far. Alexander barely heard her, his attention focused on the monitors as Security Chief Marcus Torres coordinated the search. All gates in a 5-mile radius are being monitored, Marcus reported. We've got teams checking every location Timothy knows or might go to. His favorite park, Alexander said suddenly, the one with the red slide. He always says it makes him feel safe when he's upset. Marcus immediately dispatched a team, but Alexander was already moving. I'm going myself. He might be scared of uniformed security, but he'll come to me. Alexander, wait, Victoria called after him. I'm coming with you. I know things about Robert, patterns, habits, places he might take Timothy. He wanted to refuse, to blame her for everything that was happening, but time was critical. Fine, but understand this. If anything happens to our son because of your schemes with Whitman, I'll make sure you face every possible consequence. They rushed to Alexander's car. His phone buzzed with another message. Tick-tock, Richardson, your move. The park was eerily quiet in the gathering dusk. Alexander and Victoria split up, checking Timothy's favorite spots while trying not to draw attention. The red slide stood empty against the darkening sky, no sign of their son's presence. Alexander, Victoria's voice carried across the playground. She was holding something small and blue, Timothy's favorite dinosaur keychain, the one he always kept in his pocket. Alexander's heart clenched as he examined the keychain. Timothy would never willingly part with it. Call Marcus, he instructed Victoria. Have the team sweep the entire area. Timothy was here. Victoria's hands shook as she made the call, her composed facade crumbling completely. This isn't what I wanted, she said after hanging up. I was angry at you, at the life we had. I wanted my freedom, my own success, but I never wanted Timothy to get hurt. Yet you worked with people like Whitman and Crawford, Alexander replied coldly. Did you really think they would play by any rules? Robert approached me 3 years ago, Victoria admitted, sinking onto a nearby bench. He said he could help me build my own empire, separate from yours. The plans seemed perfect. Complicated financial maneuvers, carefully crafted. Paper trails. I didn't realize until later that he was using me to get to you. Alexander's phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah Crawford. Alexander, I found something. Whitman owns a property under a shell company, less than 10 miles from you. Sending. Coordinates now. As they sped toward the location Sarah had identified, Victoria revealed more about Robert Whitman's operation. He calls it financial restructuring, but it's really systematic destruction. He targets successful companies, uses people like James to infiltrate them, then orchestrates their collapse while profiting from every step. And you helped him target me, Alexander stated flatly, his hands tight on the steering wheel. I was supposed to be different. Victoria's voice was barely audible. He said I could be a partner, not just another pawn. I believed him until I saw how he reacted when you started fighting back. That's when I realized no one partners with Robert Whitman. We're all just pieces in his game. They arrived at the coordinates Sarah had sent, a seemingly abandoned office building on the outskirts of the city. Alexander's security team was already there, maintaining a discreet perimeter. Marcus approached as they parked. Building's mostly empty, but there's activity on the third floor. Lights, movement. We've got eyes on all exits. Alexander studied the building's layout on Marcus's tablet. Any sign of Timothy? Nothing conclusive, but Marcus paused as new information came through his earpiece. Sir, we just intercepted a call from inside the building. It's Whitman, he's here. Victoria grabbed Alexander's arm. Let me go in first, she said urgently. Robert still thinks I'm on his side. I can distract him while your team finds Timothy. You expect me to trust you now? Alexander asked incredulously. No, she replied, her eyes filling with tears. I expect you to understand that whatever my faults, whatever my crimes against you, I am still Timothy's mother. I won't let Robert hurt our son. Before Alexander could respond, another text message arrived. Time's running out, Richardson. Come alone to the third floor or the game ends now. Alexander showed the message to Marcus, who immediately began protesting the risk. But Alexander's mind was made up. Get your teams in position, he instructed. If anything happens, if you don't hear from me in 15 minutes, do whatever it takes to get my son out safely. Alexander, Victoria said softly, Robert won't hurt Timothy. He needs him as leverage, but you be careful. I've seen what he does to people who threaten his plans. As Alexander approached the building's entrance, his phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from Mrs. Peterson. Timothy left something in his room, a note. It says, Dad, remember the special knock? Love, you. Alexander felt a surge of hope. The special knock, their secret code, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones, something they had invented during happier times. His son was trying to tell him something, giving him a way to signal his presence. The building's lobby was dark and deserted, dust covering the once polished floors. As Alexander made his way toward the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, he thought about all the moments that had led to this, the trust he had placed in Victoria, the empire he had built, the love he had for his son that surpassed everything else. Time to end Robert Whitman's game, he thought, starting his climb to the third floor. But this time they would play by different rules. The third floor was dimly lit by emergency lights, creating long shadows in the abandoned office space. Alexander moved carefully through the maze of empty cubicles, his senses heightened for any sign of Timothy or Whitman. The air was thick with tension and the musty smell of neglect. Near the center of the floor, a light spilled from beneath a conference room door. Alexander approached slowly, his heart pounding but his mind clear. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. Timothy's special knock echoed through the silence. Come in, Alexander. Robert Whitman's smooth voice carried through the Jairko-san, I've been expecting you. Alexander entered to find Whitman sitting at the head of a long conference table, his expensive suit incongruous in the dusty setting. Timothy was nowhere in sight, but a laptop on the table showed security feed from somewhere else in the building. Where's my son? Alexander demanded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Whitman smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. Safe. Watching cartoons, actually. He's quite a remarkable child, very calm under pressure. Must get that from his father. This game is between us, Robert. Let Timothy go. Game? Whitman raised an eyebrow. This isn't a game, Alexander. This is business. Something you used to understand before you let sentiment cloud your judgment. Alexander moved closer to the table, studying the security feed. On the laptop, the image showed Timothy in what appeared to be a break room, watching something on a tablet while James Crawford sat nearby, attempting to appear friendly. You've been systematically destroying companies for years, Alexander said, keeping his voice level. Using people like Crawford to infiltrate, manipulating records, creating false evidence. How many families have you ruined?" "Ruined?" Whitman laughed softly. "I create opportunities, Alexander. The weak fall, the strong adapt. Your wife understood that she was eager to prove herself strong by betraying her family. That's your definition of strength. Victoria was ambitious but ultimately too emotional. Like now, did you know she's currently trying to convince my security team to let her into the building? Such maternal devotion after everything she did to destroy you." Alexander's mind raced. Victoria was creating a distraction, whether intentionally or not. He needed to keep Whitman talking, keep his attention focused here. "Why me, Robert? Why target my company?" Whitman stood, straightening his already immaculate suit. "Because you represent everything I despise. The self-made man, building an empire through honest work and integrity. Do you know how much money is wasted on moral considerations? How much profit is left on the table by people like you? So this is about proving a point? That everyone can be corrupted? It's about efficiency, Alexander. The market needs to be cleansed of outdated notions like loyalty and trust. I simply facilitate that cleansing." A subtle movement caught Alexander's attention. The security feed showed Timothy looking directly at the camera, his hand moving in a familiar pattern. 3 quick taps, 2 slow ones. "You're wrong, Robert," Alexander said, taking another step forward. "Trust isn't outdated. It's the foundation of everything real in this world. Something you wouldn't understand." Whitman's smile turned predatory. "Real? Let me show you what's real." He pressed a button on his phone. "Crawford, bring the boy." But the security feed showed something unexpected. Crawford was slumped in his chair, apparently sleeping, while Timothy was nowhere in sight. Whitman's expression changed from confidence to confusion as he stared at the screen. "Looking for someone?" Timothy's voice came from behind a partially open door at the far end of the conference room. Alexander's heart leaped. Their special knock hadn't just been a signal, it had been a message. Timothy had remembered their old game of hide and seek, how they used the knock to tell each other they were hiding nearby. Whitman lunged for his phone, but Alexander was faster. In one smooth movement, he knocked the device from Whitman's hand and pinned him against the table. "It's over, Robert. The SEC has everything. The real records, the evidence of your manipulation, all of it. Sarah Crawford made sure of that before we came here." The sound of multiple footsteps filled the hallway. Marcus and his security team burst in, followed by Victoria and 2 FBI agents. Timothy ran to his father, who scooped him up in a tight embrace while keeping a firm grip on Whitman. "Dad, I remembered our secret." "Knock," Timothy exclaimed proudly. "And I put the sleeping medicine from the first aid kit in Mr. Crawford's coffee, just like in that spy movie we watched." Alexander hugged his son tighter, relief and pride warring in his chest. "You were very brave, buddy, but let's not make a habit of drugging people's coffee, okay?" Victoria rushed forward but stopped short, uncertain of her welcome. Timothy looked at her over Alexander's shoulder, his expression a mix of hurt and confusion. "Why did you help him, Mom?" he asked simply. "Why did you want to hurt us?" Victoria's carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. "I made terrible mistakes, Timothy. I let greed and anger make me forget what really mattered. I'm so sorry." As the FBI agents led Whitman away in handcuffs, he remained defiant. "This changes nothing, Richardson. The market will always favor those willing to, do whatever it takes." "No, Robert," Alexander replied, still holding Timothy close. "The market favors those who build something real, something worth protecting. You never understood that." In the aftermath, as statements were given and evidence was collected, Alexander sat with Timothy in the building's lobby, their special knock tapping softly between them, a reminder that some bonds couldn't be broken by schemes or greed. The days following Robert Whitman's arrest brought a whirlwind of activity. The FBI's investigation expanded rapidly, uncovering a network of financial manipulation that stretched across multiple states. Alexander's company headquarters buzzed with federal agents, forensic accountants, and legal teams working to untangle the complex web of deception. Sarah Crawford proved invaluable, her meticulous records helping prosecutors build an airtight case against Whitman and his associates. James Crawford, facing serious charges, had begun cooperating with authorities, revealing the full scope of Whitman's operations. But amid the corporate chaos, Alexander's primary focus remained on Timothy. The boy had shown remarkable resilience during the crisis, but the emotional impact of recent events was beginning to surface in subtle ways. "Dad," Timothy asked one evening as they sat in their favorite spot in the mansion's library, "is Mum going to go to jail like Mr. Whitman?" Alexander set aside the legal documents he'd been reviewing. "Come here, buddy," he said, patting the space next to him on the leather couch. Timothy curled up beside him, clutching his ever-present dinosaur keychain. "Your mum made some bad choices," Alexander explained carefully, "but she's working with the authorities now. She's trying to make things right." "But she helped them." "Try to hurt you," Timothy persisted. "She let Mr. Crawford spy on us. Sometimes people we love do things that hurt us," Alexander said softly. "It doesn't make it right, but it doesn't erase all the good things either. Your mum loves you, Tim. She just forgot what was really important for a while." Timothy was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Like when I broke your favorite coffee mug and tried to hide it. I was scared you'd be mad, so I made it worse by lying." Alexander smiled at his son's simple but profound comparison. "Something like that, yes, but on a much bigger scale." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson, who entered with her usual quiet efficiency. "Mr. Richardson, Miss Crawford, is here for your meeting and—" She hesitated. "Mrs. Richardson has also arrived. She's asking to speak with Timothy." Alexander felt Timothy tense beside him. "It's your choice, buddy," he said gently. "You don't have to see her if you're not ready." Timothy straightened his shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that Mrs. Peterson smiled. "I want to talk to her," he said firmly, "but can you stay with me?" In the mansion's formal living room, Victoria waited nervously. She looked different from her usual polished self, more natural, more vulnerable. When Timothy entered with Alexander, she started to rise but then stopped, letting Timothy set the pace. "Hi, Mum," Timothy said quietly, keeping close to his father. "Hi, sweetheart," Victoria replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." "Why did you do it?" Timothy asked directly, displaying that straightforward honesty unique to children. "Why did you help Mr. Whitman?" Victoria sank back into her chair, tears forming in her eyes. "I was unhappy and I blamed your father for it. I wanted to prove I could be successful on my own. Mr. Whitman made me feel powerful and important, but it was all fake. I was so focused on hurting your father that I forgot about hurting you. Did you stop loving us?" The question hung in the air, its innocence making it all the more devastating. Victoria moved to kneel in front of Timothy, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "No, sweetheart. I never stopped loving you. I lost my way, lost sight of what love really means. It's not about power or money or winning. It's about caring for someone so much that their happiness matters more than anything else." She glanced at Alexander. "Your father understands that. He always has." "Is that why you're helping the police now?" Timothy asked. Victoria nodded. "Yes, I can't undo what I did, but I can try to fix some of the damage. I'm telling them everything about Mr. Whitman's plans, helping other families he tried to hurt." Sarah Crawford's arrival provided a natural break in the emotional conversation. As Mrs. Peterson led Timothy to the kitchen for a snack, Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Victoria. "The prosecutors want to meet tomorrow," Sarah said, addressing both Alexander and Victoria. "They're particularly interested in the connection between global tech ventures and the offshore accounts." Victoria straightened, her business acumen surfacing. "I have documentation they'll want to see. Whitman kept everything compartmentalized, but he slipped up with me. He thought I was too committed to his plan to ever turn against him. Pride," Alexander mused. "It was always his weakness. He was so convinced of his own superiority that he never considered people might choose integrity over profit." "Like you did," Victoria said quietly. "Even when I gave you every reason to fight dirty, you stayed true to your principles." Sarah cleared her throat. "There's something else. The FBI found evidence that Whitman had similar operations in 3 other countries. They're talking about international charges now. The implications were clear. This was becoming much bigger than any of them had initially realized. Alexander's stand against Whitman hadn't just saved his own company. It had helped expose a global network of financial manipulation. As they discussed the details of the upcoming legal proceedings, Timothy's laughter drifted in from the kitchen, where Mrs. Peterson was apparently teaching him how to make his favorite cookies. The sound reminded them all of what was really at stake, not money or power, but the simple joy of a child who deserved to grow up understanding the true meaning of success. Victoria listened to her son's laughter, tears flowing freely now. "I almost lost this," she whispered. "All for what? A chance to prove I was smarter than everyone else?" "You haven't lost it completely," Alexander said firmly. "Timothy has a remarkable capacity for forgiveness, but it will take time and it will take real change, not just regret." The setting sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows, marking the end of another day in this new chapter of their lives. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with legal battles and emotional healing, but the worst of the storm had passed. In its wake, they were all learning valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the true measure of success. The next several weeks brought significant changes to the Richardson household. As the legal proceedings against Whitman and his associates moved forward, Alexander focused on rebuilding both his company and his family life. The mansion's atmosphere gradually shifted from tense vigilance to cautious optimism. Timothy's birthday was approaching, and Alexander was determined to make it special. The boy had shown such courage and maturity during the crisis that he deserved a celebration focused entirely on joy and normal childhood fun. However, the question of Victoria's involvement in the celebration posed a delicate challenge. "What kind of party would you like, buddy?" Alexander asked one morning over breakfast. Timothy had been sketching elaborate birthday cake designs, complete with dinosaur decorations and multiple layers. "Could we have it in the garden?" Timothy asked, adding more details to his drawing. "With my friends from school?" He hesitated before adding, "And could Mom come?" Alexander studied his son's face carefully. "If you want her there, she can come. This is your day, Tim. We'll do whatever makes you happy." Mrs. Peterson, who had been quietly organizing the breakfast dishes, spoke up. "If I may suggest, the weather forecast is perfect for next Saturday. We could set up games in the garden, maybe have a scavenger hunt like Timothy enjoys." Timothy's face lit up at the suggestion. "Yes. And could we have your special chocolate cake, Mrs. Peterson? The one with a secret ingredient?" "Of course, dear," she smiled warmly, "though I'm not sure cinnamon counts as a secret ingredient anymore, since you helped me bake it last time." The discussion of birthday plans was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Crawford, who had become a frequent visitor as she continued to assist with the legal proceedings. She carried a thick folder of documents and a surprisingly cheerful expression. "Good news," she announced, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Peterson. "The prosecutors have everything they need. Whitman's entire network is unraveling. The evidence Victoria provided was the final piece they needed." Alexander noticed Timothy paying close attention to the conversation, though he pretended to be focused on his drawing. Despite their efforts to shield him from the legal details, the boy had an uncanny ability to understand more than they realized. "Dad," Timothy asked suddenly, "if Mom helped catch the bad guys, does that mean she's good again?" The question caught Alexander off guard, but he recognized its importance. "People aren't simply good or bad, Tim. Your mom made mistakes, but she's trying to make things right. That takes courage. Like in my superhero movies, when the villain becomes a hero." Sarah smiled at the comparison. "Sometimes real life is more complicated than movies, Timothy. But yes, people can change if they truly want to." Later that afternoon, Victoria arrived for her scheduled visit with Timothy. These visits had become more frequent as she cooperated with the authorities, though they remained supervised and structured. She brought with her a small gift, a professional-grade art set she had noticed Timothy eyeing in a store window. "I thought you might like this for your birthday," she said softly, watching as Timothy explored the contents of the elegant wooden box. "Though I understand if you'd prefer to wait until your party." Timothy ran his fingers over the pristine colored pencils and sketching tools. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere despite its quietness. "Will you? Will you help me learn to use them properly?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love that, sweetheart. If your father agrees, maybe we could set up regular art sessions." Alexander, watching from the doorway, nodded his approval. He had seen how Timothy's art had become a form of therapy, helping him process the complex emotions of recent months. If Victoria could connect with their son through this shared interest, it might help heal some of the wounds her actions had caused. As Timothy showed Victoria his birthday cake designs, Alexander stepped into his study to take a call from Michael Chen. His CFO had been instrumental in stabilizing the company during the crisis, and now they were implementing new safeguards to prevent any future manipulation attempts. "The board is impressed with how we handled everything," Michael reported. "They're talking about expanding our compliance department, making us an industry leader in corporate transparency." "Good," Alexander replied, watching through his study window as Timothy demonstrated his drawing technique to Victoria. "We'll set the standard for ethical business practices. Let's show the world there's strength in integrity." The scene in the garden captured the essence of their journey, Timothy teaching Victoria how to sketch a dinosaur, their heads bent. Together over the paper, rebuilding their relationship one small moment at a time. It wasn't perfect, and the trust that had been broken would take years to fully repair, but it was a start. Mrs. Peterson appeared at Alexander's side, offering him a cup of his favorite coffee. "He's going to be okay, you know," she said quietly, following his gaze to the garden. "Children are remarkably resilient when they're surrounded by love." Alexander nodded, sipping the perfectly prepared coffee. "Yes, they are. And sometimes they teach us adults the most important lessons about forgiveness and second chances." The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the garden, highlighting Timothy's animated gestures as he explained something to Victoria, who listened with complete attention. It was a simple moment, but it represented everything they were working to rebuild: trust, understanding, and the unconditional love of family. Timothy's birthday party transformed the Richardson Mansion's garden into a wonderland of childhood joy. Colorful balloons swayed in the gentle breeze, while an elaborate scavenger hunt designed by Mrs. Peterson led excited children through the carefully manicured grounds. The centerpiece was a magnificent three-tiered cake, decorated with remarkably detailed dinosaurs that Mrs. Peterson had crafted from fondant, following Timothy's exact specifications. Alexander watched from the patio as his son led his friends through the garden, their laughter carrying across the lawn. The past few months felt like a distant storm cloud compared to the sunshine of this moment. Victoria stood at the opposite end of the patio, maintaining a respectful distance while still participating in the celebration. "He looks so happy," she said softly as Alexander approached. "I was worried my presence might spoil things." "He wanted you here," Alexander replied simply. "That's what matters." Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy running up to them, slightly out of breath and beaming with excitement. "Mom, Dad, look what we found in the scavenger hunt!" He held up an intricately crafted wooden puzzle box, one of many special prizes Mrs. Peterson had hidden throughout the garden. "That's beautiful," Victoria commented, admiring the craftsmanship. "Have you figured out how to open it yet?" Timothy's face scrunched in concentration. "Almost. There's a special sequence like a code." He worked the sliding panels carefully, his fingers tracing the patterns. "Like the special knock Dad and I have." The mention of their secret knock brought a mix of emotions to Victoria's face. It was a reminder of the special bonds between father and son that she had once tried to manipulate. But before the moment could turn awkward, Timothy succeeded in opening the box. Inside was a handwritten note from Mrs. Peterson. "For a special young man who knows the value of trust and love, your bravery inspires us all." Timothy read the note aloud, then looked up at his parents with those perceptive eyes that seemed to understand far more than his 8 years would suggest. Mrs. Peterson says bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Alexander felt Victoria tense beside him, the words hitting close to home. Their son's simple recitation of this wisdom carried extra weight given recent events. "She's right," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "And sometimes the bravest thing is admitting when you've been wrong and trying to make things right." Timothy studied his mother's face for a moment, then did something unexpected. He stepped forward and gave her a quick hug. It was brief, still tentative, but it was genuine. "I'm glad you came to my party, Mom," he said before running back to join his friends. Sarah Crawford arrived later in the afternoon, carrying a special gift that made Timothy's eyes widen with delight, a professional artist's easel, complete, with a set of canvas boards and high-quality paints. "I heard about your art sessions with your mum," she explained as Timothy examined the easel with reverence. "I thought you might like something proper to work with." The party continued into the early evening, with children playing games and parents chatting amicably. Alexander noticed how Victoria had gradually begun interacting more with the other parents, many of whom had known her before everything had fallen apart. There was awkwardness, certainly, but also a cautious acceptance of her efforts to change. Mrs. Peterson orchestrated everything with her usual quiet efficiency, ensuring that games flowed smoothly, treats were distributed evenly, and every child felt included. She had become more than just a housekeeper during the recent crisis. She was a stabilizing force in their lives, her unwavering support helping both Timothy and Alexander navigate the challenging times. As the sun began to set and parents started collecting their children, Timothy gathered his closest friends for one last adventure, a treasure hunt in the garden's maze, using flashlights Mrs. Peterson had thoughtfully provided. Alexander and Victoria stood side by side, watching the bobbing lights and hearing the delighted squeals. "I never thought I'd be here again," Victoria admitted quietly. "Standing in this garden, watching our son celebrate his birthday. I almost threw it all away." "But you didn't," Alexander replied. "You made different choices in the end." "Because you showed me there was another way when Whitman took Timothy," her voice caught. "I saw everything clearly for the first time, all the rationalizations, all the excuses I'd made for my behavior. They meant nothing compared to our son's safety and happiness." Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy and his friends emerging triumphantly from the maze, having discovered the final treasure, a collection of glow-in-the-dark stars that Mrs. Peterson had hidden in a special chest. "Dad," Timothy called out, "can we put these on my ceiling like the constellations you taught me about?" "Of course, buddy, we can work on it tomorrow." "Can Mom help too?" Timothy asked, his voice carrying a mix of hope and uncertainty. Alexander glanced at Victoria, seeing the same surprise and emotion he felt reflected in her eyes. "If she'd like to," he answered carefully. Victoria knelt down to Timothy's level. "I'd love to help, sweetheart. Maybe we can incorporate some of the constellations into your next art project too." Timothy's face lit up at the suggestion. "Yes, I want to paint the whole night sky." As the last guests departed and Mrs. Peterson began the efficient process of clearing away party decorations, Alexander reflected on how far they had come. The mansion that had once been a battlefield of betrayal and deception was slowly transforming back into a home, filled with the simple joys of family life. Sarah approached him with a knowing smile. "Quite a change from a few months ago," she observed. "Timothy seems to be healing." "We all are," Alexander replied, watching as his son showed Victoria his collection of party treasures. One day at a time. The evening ended with Timothy falling, asleep amid his birthday presents, clutching his new art supplies and wearing a content smile. As Alexander carried him to bed, he realized that sometimes the greatest victories weren't won in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the quiet moments of reconciliation and renewal. The Richardson Group's headquarters buzzed with renewed energy as Alexander implemented sweeping changes to the company's structure. The lessons learned from Whitman's scheme had sparked a transformation in how the business operated, with transparency and ethical practices becoming the cornerstone of every decision. Michael Chen stood before the board, presenting the new compliance protocols they had developed. Our new system makes it virtually impossible to hide fraudulent transactions, he explained, clicking through detailed slides. Every financial movement leaves an unalterable trail, verified by multiple independent parties. Alexander watched, from his seat at the head of the table, noting how the same board members who had once doubted him were now fully engaged in the presentation. The company's stock had actually risen since the scandal broke, with investors appreciating their proactive approach to corporate governance. We've had inquiries from several other companies about implementing similar systems, Michael continued. There's potential here to become industry leaders in corporate security and transparency. Sarah Crawford, who had been hired as a special consultant for the restructuring, added her perspective. The FBI is using our case as a model for identifying similar schemes. The patterns Whitman used are helping them prevent other corporate takeover attempts. After the meeting, Alexander found himself in his office with Michael and Sarah discussing the future of the company. The view of the city skyline stretched out before them, a reminder of the business empire they were working to protect and improve. The prosecutors called this morning, Sarah mentioned, settling into one of the comfortable chairs. Victoria's testimony has been invaluable. They're considering a reduced sentence in exchange for her continued cooperation. Alexander nodded, his feelings about his estranged wife still complex. She's trying to make amends in her own way. How's the asset recovery going? Michael pulled up some figures on his tablet. Better than expected. We've managed to trace most of the funds Whitman had hidden through Global Tech Ventures. The international accounts are taking longer, but we're making progress. Their discussion was interrupted by a text from Mrs. Peterson. Timothy's art teacher called. He's been selected for the school's special exhibition next month. Alexander smiled at the cue message, remembering how his son's artistic talents had flourished in recent weeks. The regular art sessions with Victoria had become a bridge for rebuilding their relationship, with Timothy's creativity serving as a healing force for the whole family. Speaking of family matters, Sarah said carefully, have you given any thought out of Victoria's request to take a more active role in the charitable foundation? The Richardson Foundation had been one of Victoria's primary responsibilities before everything fell apart. Now, as part of her effort to make amends, she had proposed using her financial expertise to help expand the foundation's impact. I'm considering it, Alexander replied. She has the skills, and it would give her a chance to use them for something positive. But trust has to be rebuilt gradually. Michael nodded in agreement. We could set up the same transparency protocols we're implementing in the main company. Every transaction, every decision would be fully documented and overseen. The conversation shifted to the future of the Richardson Group. The crisis had revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths in the organization, leading to innovations that were now positioning them as industry pioneers. We've had requests for consulting services from 3 major corporations this week alone, Michael reported. They want to know how we protected ourselves from corporate espionage and financial manipulation. It's ironic, Sarah observed. Whitman wanted to destroy your reputation for integrity, but he ended up making it stronger than ever. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. People are tired of corporate greed and deception. They're ready for a different approach to business. His phone buzzed with another message from Mrs. Peterson, this one including a photo of Timothy working on a new painting in his after-school art class. The image showed his son completely absorbed in his work, creating something beautiful out of colors and shapes. That's what we're really building here, Alexander said, showing them the photo. Not just a successful company, but a legacy of doing things the right way. Something Timothy can be proud of when he's older. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the office as they continued planning the company's future. The Richardson Group was evolving into something more than just a business enterprise. It was becoming a model for corporate responsibility and ethical leadership. Sarah gathered her papers, preparing to leave for a meeting with federal prosecutors. You know, when I first started tracking James's schemes, I never imagined it would lead to all this. Sometimes good things really do come from difficult situations. They do, Alexander agreed, picking up a framed drawing Timothy had given him, a colourful representation of their family, including Mrs. Peterson and even Sarah, all standing together under a bright sun. But only if you choose to learn and grow from them. As the day wound down, Alexander thought about how far they had come from those dark days of betrayal and uncertainty. The company was stronger, more transparent, and more purposeful than ever before. It was a transformation born of crisis, but sustained by a commitment to genuine values and ethical principles. The school's art exhibition transformed the usually austere gymnasium into an elegant gallery. Student artwork lined the walls, but Timothy's display held a place of honor near the center. His series of paintings titled Family Constellations captured the attention of visitors with its unique blend of astronomical accuracy and emotional depth. Alexander stood before the largest piece, a striking canvas that depicted the night sky above their mansion's garden. Timothy had incorporated the actual star patterns, but with an artistic twist. Each constellation told a piece of their family's story. The Big Dipper contained subtle portraits of everyone who had helped them through the crisis, while the North Star shone with particular brightness, representing hope and guidance. "He has remarkable talent," Victoria said softly, joining Alexander in front of the painting. She wore a simple but elegant dress, appropriate for the occasion, but notably different from her former flashy style. "The art teacher says he has a unique way of expressing complex emotions through his work." Before Alexander could respond, Timothy appeared between them, practically bouncing with excitement. "Did you see how I used the colors we practiced, Mom? And Dad, I remembered all the constellation patterns you taught me." "It's beautiful, buddy," Alexander replied, squeezing his son's shoulder. "You've created something really special here." Mrs. Peterson approached with Sarah Crawford, both women carrying programs from the exhibition. "Timothy," Mrs. Peterson said warmly, "your art teacher would like you to explain your work to some of the other parents. Would you like to do that?" Timothy looked up at his parents questioningly. Victoria smiled encouragingly. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Show them what you've created." As they watched Timothy lead a small group through his exhibition, explaining the symbolism and techniques with surprising eloquence for an 8-year-old, Sarah spoke quietly to Alexander and Victoria. "The prosecutors have finished reviewing all the evidence. They're ready to move forward with the final phase of the case against Whitman." Victoria tensed slightly but maintained her composure. "What about the international accounts?" "Most have been traced and frozen," Sarah replied. "Your information was crucial in making that happen, Victoria. The prosecutors are taking that into consideration." The conversation paused as Timothy's voice carried across the room, explaining the meaning behind one of his smaller paintings, a piece that showed a maze of shadowy shapes gradually transforming into a garden full of light. "This one is about how things that seem scary can change into something good," he told his attentive audience. "Like when you solve a puzzle or learn to trust again." Alexander watched as several parents wiped away tears, moved by the child's innocent yet profound interpretation of healing and transformation. Victoria's own eyes glistened as she listened to their son's words. "He understands so much," she whispered. "I thought we were protecting him by not talking about certain things, but he was processing it all through his art." Mrs. Peterson nodded wisely. "Children often see truth more clearly than adults. They haven't learned to complicate things with pride and pretense." The exhibition continued into the evening, with Timothy receiving numerous compliments from teachers, parents, and even a local art instructor who expressed interest in offering him advanced lessons. Through it all, the boy remained surprisingly grounded, always returning to share his excitement with his parents, Mrs. Peterson and Sarah. During a quiet moment, while Timothy was showing his friends some of his techniques, Victoria turned to Alexander. "The foundation board meets next week," she said. "I've prepared a detailed proposal for the new transparency protocols based on what you've implemented at the company." Alexander studied her face, seeing genuine commitment rather than the calculated ambition he'd grown wary of. "Michael mentioned you've been working closely with the compliance team." "I want to do this right," Victoria replied. Not for show, not for power, but because it matters. The foundation can help so many people if it's run properly. Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy calling them over to see his favorite piece. A smaller canvas that showed their family having dinner together in the mansion's kitchen, Mrs. Peterson serving her famous cookies while everyone smiled and talked. It was a scene from his imagination, a hope rather than a memory, but the longing it represented was clear. "This one isn't finished yet," Timothy explained seriously. "I'm still working on the details." Alexander and Victoria exchanged glances, understanding the metaphor their son had unconsciously created. Their own story was still being written, still evolving as they learned to navigate their new reality. As the evening drew to a close, Timothy's art teacher announced that several pieces from the exhibition would be displayed at the local community center, including Timothy's entire Family Constellations series. The boy's face lit up with pride as applause filled the gymnasium. "Dad," Timothy said later as they were carefully packing up his artwork, "do you think we could have dinner together sometime, like in my painting, with Mom and Mrs. Peterson?" And everyone. The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Alexander looked at Victoria, who waited tensely for his response, then at Mrs. Peterson, who gave him a gentle, encouraging nod. "I think we could try that, buddy," he answered thoughtfully. "Maybe start with something simple, like Sunday lunch?" Timothy's smile was brighter than any star in his constellation paintings. "Can I help Mrs. Peterson make cookies for dessert?" "Of course, dear," Mrs. Peterson replied warmly. "And perhaps your mother would like to join us in the kitchen. I understand you two have been practicing your baking skills during art sessions." Victoria's surprise at the invitation was evident, but she recovered quickly. "I'd like that," she said softly, "if everyone's comfortable with it." As they carried Timothy's artwork to the car, the evening air was cool and clear. The real stars twinkling above them